Hello everyone, this is Quinn here from newbreedagent.com, and in today's video I want to share with you my experience with mindset, tracking, staying disciplined, and ultimately cover these 5 main points here. So let's get right into it and start talking about these main points. So number 1 that I have here is something called identifying polarity. So what do I mean by this? Well, in life, we have these different high highs, right? And these different low lows. And for a while, I didn't really know this about myself. And I kind of just thought that life was just all one big experience. And, I really didn't even have, at one point, I didn't even think that I had any control over it, right? Who I was raised by, the friends that I grew up around, where I was born, all these things, the habits that I had built, I kind of just thought that it's kind of just destiny and fate, and I'll just kind of end up where I'm supposed to end up. And while that could be looked at as potentially true, over time I began to deeply understand the unconscious aspects of myself and really pay attention to these different sides that I really had. And why I want to mention it here is because, a lot of people talk about mindset and, really just understanding things intellectually. But when you only understand things intellectually, you may fail to acknowledge deeper truths that are lying in the background of your life. And so when it comes to the polarity and how this played out for me and still plays out, is here you have these peak emotional states, right? So here you're feeling like you're on the top of the world, you've got momentum, and really what's important to understand here is that regardless of what's happening in the external world, you are creating this state internally. And so when I was about 13 or 14 years old, there was this program, and it's actually, I still listen to it. It's on Spotify, and it's by Tony Robbins, and I think it's called On the Edge. But basically, I learned at that age that, we could change the way that we feel at any moment, right? And what Tony teaches is that it's due to these 3 things: our physiology, right? So how we actually are moving our body, what we're focusing on, and our language. So how we are using our body is going to influence how we feel, okay? And I want to put this, as a disclaimer before I get into any more of this, that there are periods of time where you have to be in these peak emotional states, and there are, periods of life where you have to experience the extreme lows of life. So I'm not saying that, if you are here and this is where you need to be right now, that there's anything wrong with that, and that you're supposed to just, bypass it with your mindset and, hopefully just get out of that state, right? There's learning, if not more learning right there than even in the peak emotional states in my experience, right? So when it comes to physiology, how we move our body affects how we feel and what we experience, right? Because you can imagine we all have this antenna, right? We all have this ability to tune into a higher mind, right? And a higher mind being where we have our aspiration, where we have our goals, our dreams, our ambitions, our ideas, right? Our creativity. And then when we're in these low emotional states, it almost feels like we have no ideas. We're doubting ourselves. We're anxious, we're wondering what we're doing, right? We're judging ourselves or even other people, right? So it's important to identify these things and become aware of it, because in my experience, it's actually the foundation to the mindset. Because if you don't understand that your life will ebb and flow and that you are going to be going through these peak emotional states and sometimes these very low emotional states, then you're going to constantly judge yourself about where you are, right? And this is what I used to do. It was like, why am I down here? Like, why am I doing this? And if you're not even aware that this is what goes on, then a lot of the times you're just in it, right? You're so in the story that you don't realize that there's actually something deeper happening, okay? So we have to identify this, the peak emotional states and then basically our extreme lows, right? And they're not even really, they're all a part of a spectrum, right? So they're really not even, they're just on the other side of the spectrum. It's not like it's one side or the other, right? But we have to identify this polarity, right? Because when it comes to growing your business, when it comes to doing the things that you should do, what's going to happen is a lot of the time, those insights, those ideas, the creativity, the investments you make, the way that you see the vision really comes through right here, right? So if you've worked out, if you have, like I said, made a big sale, or you've gotten super excited about an idea and you're in that state, you're moving, you're talking to other people, you're sharing your idea, a lot of insight will come down from here. Right? And so what begins to happen is like, this is where you're like, I'm going to do a 30-day plan. I'm going to stick to this plan, and I'm just going to, this could be a diet, this could be a business plan, whatever it is, you name it, right? And so you're in this peak emotional state. And right here is where some people make decisions, and then when they wake up the next morning, because they've just slept for 7-8 hours, their body hasn't moved. Their body is not awake, right? And, not even to mention, what most people eat and consume and just how their body feels overall, it's going to affect the ability to experience the highs, right? So, if your body is not clean, if your body is not being supplied with the right nutrients and the right tools and the right food and information, really, that's going to affect the amount or the capacity that you actually have to experience these peak emotional states, and the same experience for the lows, right? So if you're in that lower place and your body is not being supplied with the right nutrients, if you're eating foods that are draining your energy, then what's going to happen is those lows are going to feel even lower, right? And your ability to experience these peak emotional states is also going to be hindered as well. Okay, so we have to start here, right? And one of the things that you can do to track these different things is I have something called it's like a health tracking sheet. And basically what this does, it's really much more than that. I've called it biohacking, I've called it health tracking, I've called it embodiment tracking sheet. I mean, you could call it whatever, but basically this has a combination of different metrics. And I want to share with you my relationship with numbers, because I think it's important for everyone to understand and use numbers in their life, because numbers make up the entire world. And everything that we do can be broken down mathematically. But if you avoid numbers, if you don't utilize numbers effectively, then what's going to happen is you will only experience emotions, and you don't have things that can keep you, that guide you, right? So some people, they have an amazing relationship with numbers, and that's all they do. They just focus on numbers, and that's all they do. And maybe they limit what they experience emotionally because they're only doing and making decisions based upon numbers, right? And you'll see these people that, have mastered numbers usually get what they want, right? And then people that just focus on emotions, sometimes they don't have the ability to master the physical reality because it's just about doing what feels good, and sometimes they, avoid challenges or, don't do different things because it's just based on, oh, well, it doesn't feel good, I'm not going to do it, right? Sometimes doing things that don't feel good actually lead us to the biggest breakthroughs, right? So it's not left or right. It's not, I'm not getting into black or white. I'm just simply offering an illustration, and kind of, like I said, it's about polarity, right? And this brings me into number 2, which is using numbers to track your baseline. So the way that I've utilized numbers is that at one point I didn't at all, and I just would experience peak emotional states and then extremely low emotional states. And that was just life. It was just like I just kept doing what I was doing, and that was it, And I would wake up whenever I would want to wake up. I would go to sleep whenever I'd want to go to sleep. I would just, I had a general idea of what I could eat that was good for my body. But ultimately I didn't have a rhythm here, or I did have a rhythm, right? But the rhythm was not really steady, right? It wasn't like I was really intentional and creating the rhythm that I felt would be the best rhythm for me, right? It was more like just whatever was going on that day. And so what happens is then I move out of my core stability. I move out of my ability to make effective decisions regardless of external circumstances or regardless of what's going on in business, regardless of if like what's going on in the world, regardless of the economy, regardless of what other people think, right? Because when your rhythm is just your rhythm, things begin to influence your decisions a lot easier, right? But when you start creating that rhythm, when you start creating when you're going to go to sleep, when you start creating when you're going to wake up, when you start creating the plan for the day, when you start really being intentional about what you want and the process that you're going to have to go through to get that, and you direct your focus there, that's going to change what you feel and experience, right? So ultimately, my kind of theory about life is that, you really, at the end of the day, we think we have a lot of control. We think we can, like kind of just, some people think that, oh, well, everything in life I can control, and they take immense responsibility. And then there's some people that think life just kind of happens. And, as you're going to begin to see as I create more content, I'm always somewhere in the middle. And there's sides or pieces of both that are always valuable. So I personally love to take immense responsibility. I like to take more responsibility on me than I wouldn't say maybe most people, but just I like to know that even if somebody else could say, oh, well, that wasn't your fault, I like to think about how the way I showed up within that scenario could be pointed back to me. How can I stay accountable, right? And then there's some things where it's actually relieving to realize, you know what, I'm not actually responsible fully for everything that you do in your life and the results you get. Because if you don't want something, I can't overcommit to your process, right? So when it comes to using numbers to track your baseline, within this health tracking sheet, I track, multiple metrics, which is like the sleep start time. So we have a ring. I'm not wearing it right now. It's over there. But it's called Oura Ring. And basically this ring tracks just on its own. So you don't input numbers or anything. It, basically goes around your finger just like a normal ring. And it gives you these metrics on the iPhone app. And it gives you like sleep start time. So some people think that, they come home, right? It's been a long day, and the last time they look at the clock was, let's say, 9:30. And then they go into their room, they take a shower, and they're on their phone, and they're kind of just doing their thing. And then, they wake up at, 7, and then they're like, oh, I went to bed at 9:30, right? And, I slept X amount of hours, right? That would be like 9 hours of sleep, right? In that scenario, 9.5 hours. But, people think that. And so I used to think that, right? And this is where I said I didn't really understand or utilize numbers in a healthy way. So I just was like, oh, well, I went to sleep at 9:30 and I woke up at 7. I slept good, but I wouldn't feel that good, right? And so I wouldn't be aware. So I like to use numbers to objectively track things, right? And so you may feel really good and have not, slept a lot. And you may, sleep a long time and feel a headache because you slept too long, right? But really what this sheet that I have does is, we track our sleep, we track our when we wake up, and it gives you an objective measuring tool, right? And so within the sleep, we have all these different metrics. So we have like, awake time. This was a big one for me when I first got the ring, was that we have time where we're actually like in such a low, like we're in such a light version of sleep that you're actually kind of considered as being awake. So for me, I would be in bed, for let's say 8 hours, and then an hour or even an hour and a half in some scenarios would be awake. So I would be restless, right? But when you don't have a measuring stick, it's kind of just like, oh, well, I was in bed 8 hours and now it's time to go, right? But I started to realize, wow, I'm actually inefficient with my sleep in such a huge way because I'm restless, right? So I had to go through things to kind of figure out and basically get that to be as efficient as possible, right? Because realistically, I would rather be in bed for 6.5 hours and sleep 100% efficiently than be in bed, 10 hours and sleep the same 6.5 hours, right? The goal is not to be sleeping, right? The goal is to rest and recover. So for me, this is part of the tracking sheet, right? And so there's a bunch of metrics within sleep. And then there's also metrics that I track for workout, like did I work out? And, also meditation. So what begins to happen is that, I still experience the peak emotional states, and then I still experience or I'm aware of when things, kind of enter into that lower vibrating state. But I also become aware with the numbers of like, wait, I stopped working out, I stopped meditating, and here I am, right? Like here I am in this state, and now I can use these numbers to actually pinpoint like that's exactly when it happened. And if you don't have the understanding of the polarity, right, and you just think I'm always supposed to be in peak performance, and it's just that's all it's going to ever be, and you hold yourself to that standard. When you experience these lows, because they're going to happen, you're going to get off track, you're going to fall off the rails. But the key is to have numbers, the key is to be aware of them so that you can start getting back on track and staying after what it is that you're looking to create, right? So when it comes to this too, brings me to the third point, which has been quite an interesting contemplation for me. There's a book called You Are the Placebo by Dr. Joe Dispenza. And, there's a lot of research within the book. There's too much to actually go through. But, the premise of the book is that, your outer world, right, affects the inner world. Let's see if I could draw it here somewhere. So the diagram that's in the book is the outer world affects the inner world, right? And this is all if you let it, and ultimately, no matter how disciplined we are, this is why, in our program, we show you how to kind of shield yourself from this outer world in a way that's, productive and healthy, not like avoiding things, but ultimately, limiting what you bring into your environment, right? So the outer world affects the inner world, right? So if you're watching this video, I'm a part of the outer world for you, right? And what I'm saying is affecting your inner world. I believe that. I don't believe that. I have a question. I don't have a question. I like this guy. I don't like this guy. When's the next video, right? So all these things are happening as a result of you experiencing this, right? And then the inner world, right? So after you've made that change in the outer world and it's moved into the inner world, well, then the inner world changes the inner world, right? So what you start to think about and what you start to create as a result of experiencing something in the outer world begins to change the new questions you ask yourself, right? You start thinking about, oh, should I do that now? Should I do this? And so now, based off what you're experiencing, you're now experiencing a different internal world, right? And then what happens is then the inner world changes the outer world. So here's a perfect example is when you're in a peak emotional state, right? Let's say that, let's say that you got let's say that you just sold, a multi-million-dollar property. You made like $50,000 in commission or $100,000 in commission, whatever it is, right? And that happens in the outer world. You get the call, you get the email that the deal's secured, you pick up the check, and now the inner world's changed, right? You start thinking about, man, I should buy a new car, or I should buy a new house, or I should, upgrade my laptop, or I should, donate this money to charity, right? Whatever that is, that is that excites you or creates that next set of your reality, ultimately came in to some extent from the outer world. And when that shifts, then in the inner world, now you're creating new possibilities, right? Man, if I could just keep doing this, I'm gonna be able to make X amount this year. If I keep doing this, things are gonna get easier, right? If I stay in this place and I have this momentum, man, like no one can stop me. It's unfair, right? And now the inner world just keeps shifting. Then, and these all kind of occur, like it's not really like they're just separate events, they're all kind of interwoven. So you can't just break it down as each individual thing, right? Because sometimes we have things that come in the outer world and automatically they change the inner world because we process things so fast, right? So in the inner world now you see new opportunities, right? So maybe where you were saying that, you just closed a multi-million-dollar property, now the inner world is looking for other multi-million-dollar properties that are ready to be for sale. And now, you're on Zillow, you're on, maybe you're driving by properties and you're seeing a home seller come out of their house, and you're already looking and creating new possibilities as a result of this first part of the process, right? And so a more simple example is like, let's say that you're looking for a car, right? You're looking at a Tesla, and you decide that, hey, I want a Tesla. Now, everywhere you go, you start to see them, right? Your outer world is like, there's one, there's one, there's one. And that's almost all that you begin to see. Like, were those cars there beforehand? Yes, but without your awareness, without your conscious focus and attention on it, you weren't really seeing it, right? So this is what happens, and this is what's important to understand about tracking, is that although to some extent you're going to experience these peak emotional states and these low emotional states as well, to some extent you also create each of these, right? And it's been fascinating for me to contemplate because I don't think there's ever a final understanding of this in life. But for me, it's been interesting as I've become more aware of these different things, like, wow, well, I'm actually creating this. Like for me, I'm in these peak emotional states when I'm making these videos. When I made my program, when I'm making these videos, when I'm up, when I'm moving, when I'm teaching, when I'm educating, like this is when I'm in my peak emotional state, 100%. And when I'm in my low lows, it's like, I'm in bed and I'm on my phone and I'm on social media. So I have these really clear, things that I use to identify these states so that I can become aware of when I begin to put myself into them. And it's important to not judge each of these states because, we have to all go through our process, right? But I've become more aware that like, wow, I'm walking out of the office. I'm about to get on my phone. I'm about to, go on Instagram, right? And then what begins to happen is I start to see, oh, now I'm laying down. And so, usually this happens like, towards the end of the day, and I start to see like the possibilities, the insight, the creativity, the inspiration, it starts to kind of dwindle. And it's like, it was just there. And now it's like, and this doesn't happen to me like daily, right? But what I'm saying is I think versions of it happen daily. But where I'm at the lowest of the low, I think really the day is basically like that. And then depending on how high and how low it is, that's just part of our experience, right? But the goal is, to really love this process of staying in these states that draw in inspiration, that draw in creativity, that draw in ideas, that draw in insight. Because when you're here, you're going to be afraid to do everything. You're going to be afraid to make a call. You're going to be afraid to buy the car. You're going to be afraid to upgrade your equipment. You're going to be afraid to, make that call to the seller. You're going to be afraid to follow up with the buyer. You're going to be afraid to buy a CRM. All these things are going to be, they're not going to make sense when you're here, right? So the key is to not just, irrationally make just super emotional decisions, but sometimes you have to have that courage to go there, make these decisions so that ultimately you can change your baseline, right? Because what happens is that this is maybe your experience in, let's say, over the course of a year. And then over time, it starts to, your baseline changes. The high highs are super high, but the low lows are, they're in that you change the range, right? And your range of emotions are not super, super low very frequently, right? But what happens sometimes is, you're not aware of it and it's just like that, right? So the goal is to you're still going to experience it, but you want to, stabilize it as much as possible, okay? So the next point is the grass isn't greener. So here's what I've seen here too, is when I'm in this low, it's like everything I'm doing, and this is only my experience. Maybe you experience it, maybe you have a version of it, but I think anyone can relate to it, right? When you're in these lows, it's like the grass is greener on the other side. Like, I shouldn't be in real estate. I shouldn't be an agent. I should start an online business. I should, you name it. I should quit real estate. I should move out of the country. I should, whatever it is. Like, usually these lows bring that. Like, the possibility, the opportunity is somewhere else. And really, that's just not, in my experience, what I've seen. Only through my deep level of commitment to these different things, like to my program, for example, was I able to really see this very clearly. And it's been insane because, like I said, there's so much noise out there, right? There's so many people selling you marketing. There's so many people selling you coaching and this and that and whatever it is, right? And, if you don't create the day, if you don't plan the day, if you don't set up the fundamentals and the foundation for what you're trying to create, well, what's going to happen is you get swept by everybody else. You don't set up what you're going to do. You wake up whenever, you go check your phone, you're on social media, then you see a post by somebody, they say, oh, join our, $99 a month mastermind. And you click there and you buy that, and then you click on a few videos, and then you go check your email and somebody says, oh, the best way to do this is with cold calling. And, oh, the best way to do this is with Facebook ads. And before you know it, you literally think that the best place for the opportunity is where you aren't. Like, oh man, well, if I do that, that's going to be where I get the opportunity. And what happens is you don't commit. You don't fully commit. And commitment isn't to one thing. Like, commitment isn't just to, oh, well, that's all I'm going to do and there's no stopping, right? Because we all experience emotions and things that change the way we perceive the world. And if we don't listen to those sometimes and become aware of what they're here to show us, then, you may cut off relationships. You're going to step on people's toes because you're just like, I want to get that and that's it. And there's a balance of both, right? Like, you do want to be able to stay committed to what you're trying to create, but you also don't want to ignore things that you're feeling that ultimately are going to come back later. So the grass is always greener, in my experience, is always right here. It's like when you're in this peak emotional state, all that energy that you utilize to justify why the grass is greener with the new thing, the new strategy, the new this, that's going to be like channeled right here. So for me, when I'm in these peak emotional states, I'm creating these videos that it's absolute certainty. It's like, I could use this video for this. I could do this. I could create this. I could, it's unlimited. It's unlimited here. And what happens is when you're in that low state, that's basically where all of that same energy starts to go against you and fight against your pursuit of what you're trying to create. So it's like, the best thing you should do is quit real estate. Real estate is being taken over by Zillow and all these other people, and all these methods that I learned don't work. And, this is lack of belief, lack of certainty, right? And so that's why I said you have to be aware of, like, not going too extreme on numbers, right? Because you go too extreme on one end, it really never, doesn't have harmony. And the next component is you have to be aware of, these numbers to some extent. because if you just like go too far on one side and you have to be aware of the emotions, right? And just the process that you have to go through. And so for me, it's like, okay, I really look at these because as much as I feel this way or feel that, I've challenged it too. I've challenged like, oh man, I don't feel like working out at all. Like nothing, no part of me wants to work out, and I do it and I feel amazing. So you have to kind of play with this and challenge it too, because your perception is going to influence ultimately the way these things show up for you, okay? And if you don't challenge it, if you don't say, look, I don't feel like making any calls today at all, I'm going to make 100. Right? And then some days you say, man, I don't feel like making any calls today because I feel like, and this is going to sound crazy to the traditional business world, but like, man, I feel like if I'm making calls today, that ultimately it's coming from a place within me where I'm bored, or it's coming from a low vibrating state. So if you bear with me for a second, just challenge or like just observe what I'm saying. Sometimes I know it's like, okay, there's that balance of like, I don't feel like doing it at all, but I know I still need to do it. Then sometimes there's these, places where it's like, man, it's not there today. Like the energy's not there, or just it's a feeling that you may have about like it's deeper than just wanting to do it or not wanting to do it. It's actually like being in tune with the rhythms of life and knowing that, wait, maybe instead of making calls today, I can do this more creative work or whatever, because my sense is that people aren't going to answer the phone on this type of holiday, or they're not going to get a good response. And like I said, you got to test this for yourself. I've challenged this. I've texted people on Sunday, right? Some people, it's like Sunday is the rest day. Sunday is the day that, I'm not going to do any work. And I've texted people on Sunday, and some of them get mad. Like, why are you texting me on Sunday? So I've tested and challenged this like placebo effect of like, wait, my sense is that people are not going to respond today. Let me try it anyway. Because you got to play with this, and I'm not saying how to specifically do it, but there's going to be things in your life where you're like, you may have a deeper sense about like, wait, if I do this today, I just have a sense that it's not really going to connect, where maybe it's about being attuned to timing and different, times to send messages and times to send emails and different things like that. Now, you don't want to get too far caught into that, because then you're never going to send any message or do anything, right? So I'm not saying extreme, like, oh, well, I'm always going to wait for the right time, because time is now sometimes, right? So it's interesting because I'm like contradicting myself, but this is what happens. This is life. It's like sometimes you know that you're supposed to send these messages and you just keep going. And then sometimes you're aware, like, wait, if I wait a few days, or maybe it's an hour, maybe it's even 10 minutes to make a call, right? Just like when you think about someone and they call you, and there's just this deeper synchronicity and rhythm that's at play. So you got to be aware of that, test those things for yourself, test it out, try foods that your mind doesn't want you to try, right? Like, man, like I know I don't want to eat this food. It's super healthy. Try it. See how you feel, right? Maybe how you feel after changes your perspective. Maybe you're like, man, I need to eat this all the time, right? So you got to be aware of these different parts of yourself that are ultimately kind of governing your experience. And, I could go on, but what you're going to see is that where you're going to experience the grass is always greener is usually in the lows. It's like, man, I don't know if I should be doing this. I don't know why I'm in the business. And it just goes on and on and on and on, right? So you got to be aware of that. And lastly, to conclude, is just receiving the feedback, making adjustments. So one thing people tend to do is they experience the high highs and they go super far. They're like, I should do this, 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 and this. And then they do the lows and it's the same thing. I should quit, I should cancel, I should, all these different things, right? So you want to be able to receive feedback, right? So, okay, when did I stopped working out. Oh, I stopped doing my meditation. And now I feel like for the last few days, I've been hanging out here. And if you're hanging out there for too long, you got to be aware of like, wait, I'm receiving feedback, and balance these different things between like, okay, do I need to be here and stay and go through this process? Or am I kind of choosing to stay here and hang out here and I'm being lazy, right? And, like I said, this is all, I can't teach or show like how this is going to, come through for you and your experience. But all I know is that, if you don't have the framework of the polarity, I mean, none of this really has any sort of deeper underlying framework that you can be successful with long term. Because if it's just about numbers and this, and you're not aware of like these low lows and peak emotional things in your life when you're making a lot of money, when you're spending a lot of money and you're doubting yourself and you're not making money, you're probably not making calls, you're probably not talking to people, you're not making content, you're not eating well, right? So you have to be aware that this all is like a fractal. It's a fractal of your own experience. So if you're in these states, what you create in the outer world begins to fractal out. And if you need to look up fractal, it's Fractal. And this is all throughout nature. I mean, basically the entire universe and our experience is just a fractal experience. Like, it just stems from one endless repeating pattern, and it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it just exponentially creates our reality, right? So when you think of it that way, it's actually much more simple. When I'm in these peak emotional states, I make decisions that I would have been super afraid of down here. I make the investment, I make the call, I get the client, I stay consistent, I feel a certain way, right? When you're in the lows, I'm laying down, I'm hanging out, I'm doubting myself, I'm on social media, I'm comparing, I'm judging, I'm anxious, whatever these things are, right? So this is my perspective. This is what I wanted to share with you guys as real estate professionals, because ultimately it doesn't matter about the marketing. This is why I've had to change and correct and adjust what it is that we do from being marketers to really, showing this stuff, because this is the same thing that happens in marketing. I've seen people that run our systems and they're in these high highs and they shoot out, I want to spend $500 a day on ads. And then, they go halfway through the day and they're like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? I just spent $200 and I need to cut back and turn off all the ads and save money. And then you go there, right? So if you don't understand this, if you don't understand outer world affecting inner world affecting outer world, physiology, focused language, tracking numbers, being aware of metrics and your own baseline, you're going to be buying and doing stuff from these states all the time. Let me go do that marketing strategy. Let me go do this. Let me try that. Let me cold call. Oh wait, it's not about cold calling. The grass is greener on the other side. Let me do Facebook ads and let me do social media, right? So when you start doing that and going from extreme states to other extreme states without having a healthy baseline, you're going to be jumping from thing to thing no matter what. And once again, it's a fractal. So if you're doing that day to day, week to week, you're doing it moment to moment, right? So if you're jumping from big thing to big thing over the course of a day, then moment to moment you're doing that. You're probably checking this, you're checking that, you're going from here, you're going from there. So, and the same thing on the high states. When you're focused, right? When you're not breaking your focus, when you're able to go a full day uninterrupted, 7-8 hours of just pure focus, creating content, creating videos, not taking phone calls, whatever those things are for you it's going to be different. For me, it's not taking phone calls. It's creating this. It's creating long-term blueprints that's going to enable me to sell my program to the best of my ability, right? So on those days, I got to sacrifice those calls or organize around it, because if I'm just taking inbound calls all the time, those people could be watching a video, which doesn't require my time. So I have to sacrifice short-term things, which may appear to be, like questionable to other people, but I know that, man, videos are the future. Content is the future. Being online is the future. So Same with being a real estate agent. You got to balance and discern between what's right for you. Maybe you need to be on calls all the time and that's your place. I'm not telling you which one's right. But ultimately, what I'm saying is that your experience day to day, week to week, month to month, over long periods of time, it fractals out. So when you're in these peak emotional states and you're focused, you're undisturbed, you're doing meaningful, valuable work, well then each moment within that is made up of that. That's how you get the full day of it, right? But if you're not focused, you're distracted, you're questioning, you're doubting, well, every moment you're doubting. Everything you're doing, you're doubting. You're moving from Facebook to Instagram. You're going from Gmail to messages and messages to Messenger and all these different things. And I know this because this is the human experience. So if your brokerage or your friends or the people you're getting marketing from or whatever it is, if they're not talking about this, what else is there to talk about? We could talk about ads and stuff all you want. But if you're not aware of this and fully consciously trying to improve this as much as you can, it doesn't matter what marketing you get. I could give somebody the formula, and if they're not understanding this, they're gonna run the system and turn it off and then turn it on and turn it off. And so I've come to learn that this is the real challenge. The real challenge is governing yourself, managing your time, and doing things and sticking to them. Not putting in a template, copying and pasting, putting in a headline. That anyone can do that, right? So hopefully this video has brought you some sort of value. If you are interested in learning more about what it is that we do and how we can potentially help you master this, implement it into your real estate business, and then apply it with practical tools like marketing, like content, like utilizing social media effectively to get new clientele, feel free to click the button or link below and you can set a call with me personally and we can talk about some of this stuff, maybe some of the stuff you're experiencing and you're resonating with, and how we can help you apply this framework of understanding so that you can implement marketing successfully and ultimately become what we call a new breed agent. So I trust that this video has found you well. I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.